Right. We'll go back one. This was me 2 days ago trying to work out what to say today and what I wanted to tell everyone about. Thank you so much for that introduction. The two things you mentioned, I didn't put into this talk, so you guys will have to go and find those at another time. But the first thought was panic, which is my general sort of state of being a lot of the times. At which point I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to relax, and this will be the way forward. And then when thinking about what I wanted to actually talk about today, realize that those two things in combination really are what it's kind of all about. Relax, but also panic, how I ended up drawing comics. And then to follow on from that, how you can be this or panic products too. So best place to start usually is with a plan. I wrote that down, and then I wrote that thicker, because if you're going to do comics, if there's anything you want to learn or know about comics, it's often you need to go over and make things thicker. I put an exclamation mark on that, so people thought, it's important. I put another one on that, not as good. 1 exclamation point, quite good. 2, it's weird. 3's fine. 3's, look, if there's a graph, okay, down the bottom you've got number of exclamation points, and along the side, effectiveness. Essentially, 1 is kind of just normal, and then 2, not as good, 3, great, and then after that, it's diminishing returns. So what's important to remember is this is not the plan. This is my obsession with exclamation points and writing over stuff. So this is a lot bigger than I imagined when I did it all. So back to the plan. Should probably start with an introduction. We'll get to that. Then my next thought was talk about what I do, which is whatever this is. And 3, explain that it's quite fun and you can do it too. When I first wrote that, I wrote, explain that it's quite easy and you can do it too. And then I thought, no, don't sell yourself short. There is something to this. So this is me, and I draw comics. There's some other stuff that I do as well, which is the stakes, some more writing, some more art, occasionally a map. If we wanted to get specific on the kind of things, there's a lot going on. There's a book a while back, some billboards at some point, a lot of some branding stuff, which is nice, exhibitions. There's at least 3 New Yorker pieces, and I need to get back there. They weren't, not in the magazine, unfortunately, but online, I'll take it. And doing talks, apparently. But more importantly, how did I end up here? This is something that my parents asked me a lot, actually. So I started off in architecture, studied architecture and was working in a firm. Something you should probably know about architecture. This is not what architecture looks like. It's actually this. Nobody's used that since about the late 90s, and those were the older people there. So this is me working in architecture. I think I just moved to London. And yeah, when I said I make mistakes a fair bit, that should say not as cool. But here I was doing architecture. I just moved to London, and I had started writing little cartoons to friends on Post-it notes. This was largely because, there's that classic WhatsApp group, and it's on a Monday after a big weekend, and everyone's sort of updating on what happened and, everything. And I couldn't really sit there on my phone in an open, cool open plan architecture office. So I just started writing my replies on sort of Post-it notes and sending those through to the group instead, so I could quickly get away with it. And a lot of these took the form of comics and funny drawings and that sort of thing. And I just sort of kept doing them and it sort of got a little bit out of hand to a certain degree. And then friends were saying, look, you really need to put these onto Instagram. And at the time, I literally said, it's a terrible idea. Nothing will come from it. Don't bother. Anyway, I eventually decided to start on Instagram. And when I had to come up with a name, the entire lead up to this moment, friends had sort of been drunkenly saying, when's InstaChaz happening? As sort of a shorthand for whatever the Instagram that I was going to eventually make would be called. And so in the end, I literally just called it InstaChaz, which 8 years down the track, may be regretting it a little bit. It's not the most clever one, but that's how we started. And from there, I just started putting up these little comics, and sort of comics that I was writing at work a lot and stuff that would just relate to anyone really. And very sort of simple, straightforward stuff. A lot of it about, the perils of working. I still couldn't draw a very good T-Rex. My financial situation as well, I liked drawing about that. Architecture famously doesn't pay very well. And yeah, more, you can tell these were done a while ago because Facebook and Twitter are mentioned there, which I don't think I've logged on to for years. And yeah, so these kept on going and going and going. So my Kia stuff, that was always a hot topic. And then a few months later, and by that stage, it had started to build a little bit. I think there was maybe 6,000 followers. And there was just this very weird week where a BuzzFeed article and a HuffPost article came out on the same day within hours of each other. And in a week, it went to 60,000, and the week after, 80,000. And I was basically like this, sort of seeing this all come in. And it was kind of a wild time. And basically, essentially, by the end of the week, I had book offers coming in and ended up getting an agent. I didn't even know what an agent was at the time. And finally, eventually published a book off the back of all that. The book also was published in German, so that's floating around. And the architecture job, I left because it turns out that you don't need a huge advance to get paid more than your architecture job. That says more about architecture than the publishing industry, I must say. Anyway, fast forward. So that was then. This is now. I feel like lately a lot of talks just use the fast forward thing for the obvious, just to skip over the bit that we don't really care about. But between then and now, a few things happened. I moved to Berlin. As you can see, this is also out of date, this image. And I also stopped writing on Post-it notes and actually finally got a tablet and started moving up with technology. That's right. And so that more or less brings you up to speed of where I'm at now. So yeah, that's good. We've done that. Right. Talk about what I do, of course. What do I actually do? This is, there's a lot of things, really. That one, yes, definitely. There's a lot of things. The main one is mostly just draw things I find funny. And this is sort of the bulk standard kind of thing is continually feed that algorithm, is drawing things on Instagram, putting them out there and doing stuff. Ideally, you want to draw things that brands find funny every now and again. And there's that sort of artist thing where no one wants to really do like brand work all the time. But my God, there's been some brands who've come out and given me jobs at times when I really, really needed one. And just the most wonderful people who are sort of running those campaigns, and they come back again and again. And you build up these relationships with certain people and certain companies, and it's one of the most wonderful things to have as an artist. I also like working with brands because often the requests you get have an ability to really push you in a direction that you would have never actually gone to, without. For instance, this is a legitimate request. I had someone ask for a joke about compound interest, but, make it funny and exciting. I was like, yeah, I'm your guy. And so that's how this comic for Zopa ended up. And that took a while to get those coins to balance out and be the right height as well, by the way. So, brands, funny, yes, done. Throw things at the New Yorker. That says throw thing at the New Yorker. I did actually go back to fix that mistake, and in the end realised I couldn't be bothered, and I thought, hey, I've already admitted that I make a lot of mistakes, most of them to do with spelling. Why not roll with it? This is one of my favourite things as a cartoonist or, comic artist, is just producing stuff and sending it to the New Yorker and getting that rejection, and it's fine. Because they're really nice with the rejection. That, it'll be like, oh, not for us this time. And you're like, no, this time, no, next time I'll get there. But eventually I did get something into New York, into their Shouts and Murmurs a number of years ago, which was a millennial's guide to cocktails. I didn't choose that title, by the way, but this is sort of my idea of the real ingredients of cocktails. So that's the New Yorker. The other thing I do is hang out at the post office a lot. With what I do, I sell a bit of work online. I've become very good at the post office. I know the exact times to go. I know what staff members are working when for the optimum experience. Stare into space rails at a time. That's a big favourite. That happened a lot in the last 24 hours putting this talk together. Throw an exhibition. This is also a good one as an artist. And I just wanted to delve into an exhibition a friend and I did recently. We both studied architecture and we both have very different styles of art. And the only way we could work out a common thread between the two of us was by the fact that we both used to do architecture. And so we literally split the exhibition down the middle, including the invite. And look what architecture artists do. And so we pulled it together. We found a little gallery space, Backhouse Projects, who are just wonderful. And it's a really great local little gallery space. It used to be a bakery. And this was the space beforehand. And even the actual space was split in the middle, which we didn't anticipate, which was actually quite lovely. And so we dragged all our art in there and put everything on the wall, and it looked fantastic. And this is kind of how it looked at 6 o'clock when we opened the doors for the opening exhibition. What we hadn't factored in was that Germany would get into the semi-final of the Euros and the match would start at the exact minute that our exhibition opened. This is me doing some final prep. And this is at 6 o'clock when we opened. Fantastic. But thankfully, some non-soccer fans eventually turned up. And it was actually a wonderful, wonderful sort of thing. It was really nice to have some stuff on the wall as well. There's someone who works predominantly in sort of in a digital space and just putting things out on Instagram. It's very nice to be able to draw physical things and actually, real art. The number of times I drew something physically and then did the double finger tap thinking I was still on a tablet was slightly disturbing. But nonetheless, I wanted to run through this thing. So I did this comic years ago, and it was only a few days before the exhibition where I realised, I reckon I can probably buy a jigsaw puzzle and recreate this for real. And I did, and I'm really happy with it, how it came out, largely because of the absolute pain in the ass it was to make. It essentially required I couldn't find a puzzle that was the right dimension, so I had to sort of Frankenstein monster a few together, and then I worked out I couldn't really paint them all together, otherwise it looked terrible. So I had to pull them apart, paint each piece individually, have a grid system so I could work out where each piece went. But I think you'll agree, it eventually worked, which was quite thrilling. Then I drew bins. There was another thing with, if you're going to have an exhibition in Berlin, you better have some Berlin content. So I quite like this little, every time I see one of these bins that's kind of dropped all their rubbish, I do feel like they're just like slightly relieved. I took that to another step further. This is the full Berlin recycling list, if anybody's wondering. It's funny as an artist, you get an idea and then you find yourself meticulously tracing bins for an entire afternoon. And then there was this piece, which is downstairs currently. This was 3 days before the exhibition. I decided that I was going to draw 184, I think, little characters all doing a different thing. And it's amazing how hard or how quickly trying to think of things for little men to do becomes after you've done about 120 of them. So to get that finished was a delight. That's me having finally finished it, and to get it up on the wall is quite exciting. I think it's probably the largest piece I've ever done by hand. My hand was a mess by the end of it, sort of this clawed. Anyway, so I'm quite proud of that one. Where are we? Oh yes, back to things I do. The other one is one-word topics. And this is more sort of a drawing exercise for me, especially if I'm sitting there, blank page in front of you and kind of trying to get something going on. And so one-word topics is the way I'll get around that. So usually it starts off sending just a message like that out on Instagram and getting everybody to send in just a word, any word, and then attempt to make a comic out of it. For instance, a lot of people send in keyboard, and I've got a theory that people just send the first thing they see in front of them. And usually I end up reverting back to sort of wordplay and stuff, or at least kind of drawing something that they're not expecting, especially if they're expecting a keyboard. So that's how I draw a keyboard. And then someone sent in deadline, again, something else right in front of them perhaps. And so for deadline, I went with more of a morbid microphone. I think you can see where this is going. Yeah, that was microphone. And then, look, occasionally I'll drift into Venn diagram zone, and I thought Tupperware would be great for a Venn diagram. That's not really a Venn diagram. So that's what I do, done. And then which leaves us down to the end, which is, I guess, just sort of wanted to spend a bit of time talking about, like, I guess it's process. Yeah, process. This is one sort of take on my creative process. You've got a room, you've got stuff, and if you just throw stuff at the wall, some of this stuff will be good and some will be terrible. It's a good policy. But if you add a ceiling fan, then you can get more stuff on more walls, more ceilings, and that gets progressively worse. And then if we break this down, really good stuff, pretty good stuff, me trying out stuff, potentially good stuff. How about something a little less whimsical? Fine. This next sort of process, I do wonder if if I'm overthinking it, but let's jump into it anyway. Every time I sort of draw a comic, I've got a general sort of thought, which is like a thing, and the thing is sort of something that is, this is whimsical, so something that is, or, a funny thing that you've noticed, or a thing you want to make a joke about. And then it's a case of just applying it to a visual framework that people understand. If you took this to a non-joke kind of thing, say the idea that there's tap water on the right, you could use visual frameworks of a water drop and an arrow and a glass, and you've explained that through visual medium. That's a really basic way of looking at it. If to put it into, I guess, practice, I know. To put it in practice, say friend with a small bladder always needs to go to the loo. Okay? It's always like, where's the next stop? I need to go to a cafe or a bar or anything like that. So in this case, this would be my idea or thing. And then it's a case of finding a visual framework that suits that sort of concept and idea. In this case, when can we stop? Where are we stopping? That idea comes pretty quickly. Stops, literal stops. So with that, there's your framework. And then your comic becomes the small bladder transport map with an identifiable visual cue that people know the rules of and all the stops. I got a lot of fan mail from that one. People go, finally, someone understands. You can also flip this over. And this is something else I quite like to do when I really run out of ideas, is just start drawing visual frameworks. And so these are a few that, this is the worst slide, by the way. I drew this at the last minute. This is actually how I draw most of the time when I'm not drawing anything that needs to be published. But these visual cues are sort of, a dartboard has rules. There's a scoring system. There's things throwing at it. You understand what it is. Same with a house of cards. If you pull that bottom one, it'll all fall down. Lighthouse, that has a set of rules. It stops boats at, or things. I don't know what the coffee plunger does. That was in front of me. But, we've all seen the meme of, the hard exit. And the Rubik's Cube, which I did start colouring in until I realised I have no idea how Rubik's Cubes works. And I coloured in an entire corner one colour and just went, that's not right, is it? But if we're to take, say, two of these ideas, these two specifically because I've already done comics on them, you could take the dartboard and have in the dartboard everything that I need to do and the days of the week being your darts, where you've only just managed to do the largely pointless thing on the Friday. Or when it came to lighthouses, I started to apply the idea of a lighthouse to being more of a sort of an anthropomorphic figure and thought, well, what if lighthouses could talk? So those are the first two. Throw stuff at a whimsical fan. Get confused with visual frameworks. And then my third go-to is perspective shifting. I'm sure there's better names to this, but it's where I go, which generally, things are just funny. And the key to, I guess, finding more funny with them or finding something to do with that is to just shift the perspective or look at it from a different angle, really. Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill, not that funny for him, I guess, but hilarious, potentially hilarious for us. If you're, this is something that's happening in myth, presumably. However, if we shift the perspective to a modern day setting, you can apply a certain comedy to it. Or you could literally just shift the perspective of the camera. So now we're looking down the hill at the boulder, Sisyphus hidden behind it. And now, a reminder, this is not your original stuff at all. And I first came across it with, we're going right back now, 1947, Raven Kinu. He wrote this wonderful book called Exercises in Style. I don't know if you've heard of it. It doesn't matter if you haven't. But it tells a very short story of a man on a bus who gets on the bus and sees a man he saw earlier in the day. And that is pretty much the story. There's some other detail there, but it's a very short, quick story. And then what Raymond did was took that story and told it 100 different ways. So, tells it backwards. Once I got off the bus and there was a man there and etc. Later on, Matt Madden, who's a cartoonist, wonderful cartoonist, wrote his version of this book, but he did it in comic form. And it's again a wonderful, wonderful short story where he's drawing at his desk upstairs. He walks downstairs, opens the fridge and realizes he has no idea why he walked downstairs. And he then tells this in, 99 different ways. One of my favorites is each panel is completely black except the last one, and you realize it's the view from inside the fridge and you see this thing. And actually, Raymond Canoe got that idea from old mate Johan, so who will not do Piano Man under any circumstances. So with that idea of shifting the perspective, I'll take something as simple and as identifiable as our friend Sisyphus and shift it to the top of the mountain, for instance. Or you can see what the boulder's doing on its day off. Surely the boulder lives a life. Maybe the boulder's trying some stand-up. Or taking the idea of just the rolling ball in of itself and applying something there. Or the horrific void of existential dread following you behind, no matter what you're doing. And for me, that's, the constant need to the constant struggle to come up with new ideas. But with any luck, everything I've sort of told you, you're up to date with me now. Has been helpful, I guess. And we've done that one. And yeah, you can find me there. Thank you very much.
Nice, thanks.
Thanks.